Welcome in, everyone, to the Talkin Tide podcast on the Pigskin Podcast Network. I'm Chase Goodbread, sports columnist with the Tuscaloosa News and the weekly host of Crimson Cover Television on WVUA 23, joined by Travis Reier, the senior analyst at BamaOnline.com. And, of course, you can get the Talkin Tide podcast wherever you like to get your podcasts as well, live on YouTube and Facebook. You can find us on Twitter at Talkin_Tide. Just give us a follow there. You'll get links to all of our podcasts. I want to thank a couple of sponsors at the top, certainly DraftKings and Peterbrook Chocolatier of Tuscaloosa. More on them later in the program. Travis, Alabama basketball at the top of the show this evening here as we record on a Sunday night, a week before Christmas. Gonzaga takes down Alabama 190 over in Birmingham. The final score ends quite a run for Alabama. Of course, the Crimson Tide coming off of that 3-point win over Memphis at home from Tuesday night, which has also happened since we last podcasted. But the Zags returned the favor, I guess, Travis, in Birmingham with a 10-point victory. Phenomenal games from Drew Timme and Brandon Miller. Those two stole the show.
Yeah, they both look like All-Americans. You knew Drew Timme was an All-American, and you had seen enough from Brandon Miller, even in his abbreviated time to this point at Alabama, to think he's capable of the type of performance we saw from him Saturday afternoon in Birmingham. But look, going into the game, if I had told you, hey, Alabama's going to shoot 52% from the field, 83% from the free throw line, and score 90 points, Chase, you probably would have liked the Crimson Tide's chances. But really, for a second year in a row at Legacy Arena, an opponent has come in there and really cut up the Alabama defense. And Timme was a guy that you figured might go for 25 plus. But this is a Gonzaga team that, in terms of consistent scoring to go along with him, had struggled with that. Well, they didn't struggle with it all that much in the 10-point win over the Crimson Tide.
No, the only thing hotter than Brandon Miller was Gonzaga's whole team in the second half. The Zags shot 74% from the field in the second half, Travis. I mean, they just could not miss. Brandon Miller did really a Superman impersonation to keep Alabama into the game most of the way through the second half. I guess, the Zags extended that lead out to double digits with 7, 8, 9 minutes to go, maybe. So, they controlled things down the stretch, but had it not been for Miller doing some spectacular things, Alabama could have lost this one by 20 pretty easy.
Yeah, an efficient 36 for Brandon Miller, too. I mean, 22 shots, that's getting it up a little bit, but 36 points off of that is pretty impressive efficiency on the offensive end. And you're right, they needed it because turnovers continue to be a big part of who this team is, especially in the first half when you turn it over 14 times. And, even when Alabama got out in front early, you were still seeing the empty trips via turnovers start to pile up. And so you're not going to sustain leads against teams like Gonzaga for very long if you keep that up. And unfortunately for Alabama, that continued to be the case. A little bit better in the second half, turned it over 7 times. But by that point, Gonzaga had reached a level of confidence that sustained them for 40 minutes. They had a couple of guys that they were really worried about going into that game, especially Nolan Hickman, the point guard, right there on the basketball. But as that game wore on, he even grew more and more confident in his own scoring ability. And, 18 from Jaden Bradley, that's nice to see, but just couldn't get enough stops. And, again, when you're turning it over at the rate that Alabama did on Saturday, those are some tough things to overcome.
Yeah, turnover is a big problem for Alabama, obviously. And I thought one thing Gonzaga did so well outside of Timme, and Timme himself did this a couple of times, but knocking down that little teardrop runner in the lane from about 10 to 12 feet out. I mean, Gonzaga, and that shot's really not in the Nate Oates playbook, right? Because Nate wants the ball either shot from 3-point range or he wants it at the rim. But Nate found out that there's a couple other ways to skin a cat, I guess, because those runners in the lane killed Alabama. They were able to be accurate, putting the ball up right over Alabama's shot blockers, right over Bediako, without taking it to the rim, and it paid off.
I thought the game defensively reminded me of last year's meeting between these teams in Seattle, except it was in reverse. I thought Alabama was too often late in its coverages on the defensive end, and I thought that was a big problem for Gonzaga a year ago. I know Nate, after the game, pointed to effort as much as anything else. He just didn't feel like his team played hard enough on Saturday. And I thought a year ago in the win over Gonzaga, it was almost disrespectful the way Gonzaga approached Alabama defensively. And the Crimson Tide was able to get into the paint time and time again. And when it didn't score in close, it was able to get the ball out to open shooters. And I think they made 13 threes in that game a year ago. And I thought Gonzaga offensively did a lot of the same things to Alabama this year that the Crimson Tide did to the Zags a year ago.
Yeah, continued increase in minutes for Jaden Bradley as well, the freshman guard. Travis, that guy's role moving up. We heard Nate Oates say after the game that Javon Quinterly is battling something of a confidence issue, I guess, right now. Limited minutes for Quinterly again. Pretty high turnover rate, 3 turnovers in 12 minutes. That's certainly not a good ratio. And Oates feels like Quinterly needs to get in a little bit better headspace, clearly. And Bradley's taking advantage of his minutes, continuing to score around the rim, dish out assists, and perhaps most importantly, of all Alabama's players, right, at least lately, he's not been much of a problem in the turnover department.
No, he's not. He's mature beyond his years. He's comfortable, it seems like, in the biggest of settings, as we saw against Houston, and then again to an extent against Memphis. He had 18 against Gonzaga on Saturday. And you're also still without Namari Burnett. So when we talk about some of the defensive issues for this team, I think you can point to his absence for some of that. But still, this team in its last 3 halves is giving up 51, 52 points per half. If you go back to the second half against Memphis and then both halves against Gonzaga on Saturday, it's 155 points they've allowed in 3 halves of basketball, 60 minutes of basketball. That doesn't add up so good. And I'm sure that's a point of emphasis for Nate moving forward into this week.
It is. And I think the turnovers have been a bigger issue in the first half than the second half across more than just this game against Gonzaga, Travis. That was certainly the theme against Houston. A lot of turnovers first half, cleaned it up in the second half. I'm not sure how the turnovers split over the halves against Memphis, but if they can come out of the gate taking care of the basketball a little bit better, perhaps that'll help hold the scoring down on the other end.
Does it seem like guys are pressing maybe too much in this rotation? It seems like they play a lot of guys, and that's fine. But some of these guys, it seems like Quinterly, one of them. As soon as he gets on the floor, it's an urgency to make something happen. It feels like,
right.
This team, I get it. Minutes are precious, and so I'm sure a sense of I need to get it done when I do get the opportunity. Just feels like sometimes guys are just simply trying to do too much, and a lot of times it's the easy play that'll help you win games than it is trying to win the game on a possession or two once you do get on the floor.
No doubt. And I think one guy who seems to let the game come to him a little bit coming off the bench is Rylan Griffin.
Mm-hmm.
And he's given Alabama some good minutes lately, some good minutes late against Gonzaga. He's a hustler. He can leap. He can get to the rim. I like what I see of Rylan Griffin to this point. His limits his minutes have certainly been pretty limited. But there's at least one example of a guy that Oates can go to on the bench who's not going to force too much.
Yeah, with Burnett out, that's that benefits Griffin. That's an opportunity for him, and played just 9 minutes on Saturday, had 8 points as you outlined, and they got to do a better job taking care of the basketball across the board. I mean, even Brandon Miller, as great as he is, he can turn it over. Now, he had 6 of Alabama's 21, but he also played a team high 36 minutes. So you got to take that into account too. What you don't like to see is guys playing 10 or 15 minutes and they're in that 3, 4, 5 turnover range.
Right. Alabama, of course, entered the week ranked in the top 5 after the big win over Houston. Travis, since then, of course, they've split a pair, beat Memphis, lost to Gonzaga. What do they do with Alabama in those rankings that when they come out again, Travis? They put them in the second 5, maybe? You wouldn't think it'd be too much of a tumble losing to Gonzaga on a neutral floor.
Well, the good news for Alabama over the weekend was that some of their more impressive wins did a good job of winning. North Carolina beats Ohio State. Houston goes on the road and beats second-ranked Virginia. So, Virginia was number 2, and Houston knocked them off. Alabama sitting there at 4. Now, look, it's important down the road maybe for seeding purposes, but a 2-1, essentially a 2-1 week. I guess it was more like 8 days from Houston to Memphis to Gonzaga. If we're all being honest here, if we had told you that was going to be the outcome of that stretch going into it, I think you'd have been okay with it. And I think Alabama is still a top 10 team, I would guess, when the rankings come out. But, I think regardless, a team that still has a lot of promise.
Took 2 out of 3 in the Phil Knight Invitational. Then they take 2 out of this stretch.
So 4 and 2 from those 6.
Gonzaga.
Yeah, I mean,
and
one of those was
a
true road game. Yeah, a true pit game. So, yeah.
Up next for the Alabama basketball team, they're going to be taking on Jackson State Tuesday night at Coleman Coliseum. That'll be a 6 p.m. Central Time tip-off. It'll broadcast on the SEC network, and that'll be it for the non-conference schedule. Travis, getting right into SEC play right after this next one against Jackson State.
Yeah, I got a common opponent with their SEC opening opponent, Mississippi State, coming up in Jackson State. Mo Williams, former Alabama standout, going to bring the Tigers to Tuscaloosa. So, been a rough stretch for JSU through 11 games. Played some really good teams. Played Mississippi State fairly tough. Lost by 10. No shame in that. But this should be an opportunity for Alabama to get a win and then go into the Christmas break. And it's here, man. As you said, SEC plays right upon us.
All right, we're going to thank a couple of sponsors here on the Talkin Tide podcast. Jump into a little bit of football talk before we close things out. We're going to start by telling you about DraftKings, the corporate sponsor here at the Talkin Tide podcast. DraftKings Sportsbook, the official sports betting partner of the NFL. It's a go-to spot when you're betting on NFL this holiday season. Right now, new customers can bet $5 on any NFL team to win and get $150 in free bets if they do. You can also get in on those same game parlays. Can't beat that either. The more legs you add, the bigger the boost, the bigger your shot to win big with the DraftKings Sportsbook. So download that DraftKings Sportsbook app now. Use the promo code TPPN. Place a $5 bet on any NFL team to win their game and get $150 in free bets if they do, only at the DraftKings Sportsbook with promo code TPPN.
I'm going to tell you about Peterbrook Chocolatier there in Tuscaloosa. It's not too late. Yeah, I mean, we're just a week away from Christmas Day, but they're there for you. Night and day, I guess you could say, at Peterbrook Chocolatier. Get by and check them out. All of those Christmas treats are waiting for you. Still got the Roll Tide theme goodies as well. And, of course, the signature item, the chocolate-covered popcorn. Hey, no stocking is complete without Peterbrook Chocolatier. Get by and check them out. 1530 McFarland Boulevard North in the Indian Hills section of Tuscaloosa. 16th year in business now for Peterbrook Chocolatier of Tuscaloosa. And they're ready for you right there again. 1530 McFarland Boulevard North in the Indian Hills section of Tuscaloosa.
All right, and we'll turn to football now before we close things out here on Talkin Tide. Travis, the latest in all the lead up to Alabama's matchup against Kansas State in the Sugar Bowl, of course, is that the top two players and team captains, Will Anderson and Bryce Young, will play in the game. Now, Travis, the Vegas man had this game at -3 before that announcement was made. Alabama -3. And since Young and Anderson declared that they're in, that number has moved from 3 to 6. Is it done moving, or does this announcement drive the money even further and get it up over a touchdown? Or is 3 to 6, do you think, as far as it'll go?
I think there's some on second thought money that's still out there, maybe. Goodbread. I know that, we got the announcement, we got the news on Friday, and I don't suspect that, barring injury, we won't see guys like Will Anderson and Bryce Young, but there may be some money that is just making sure at this point. But yeah. I would think, again, if it stays the way it is with Will, with Bryce, and not just those guys, but Jahmyr Gibbs, Brian Branch, potentially, Jordan Battle, if those guys are truly staying in, I would think that number increases as we get closer to New Year's Eve.
You certainly, you're talking about a former Heisman Trophy winner in Young, the best defensive player in the country pretty much, and Will Anderson are certainly one of them. Those two by themselves obviously make more than a 3-point impact on any game. So I don't think it'll push to double digits, but I won't be. I'm like you, and really, even if nobody opts out, I expect that thing to keep moving to a bigger number.
And I think
the Alabama favorite.
Yeah, there's part of this too that Kansas State's a pretty damn good football team. On top of it, so this is the Big 12 champions we're talking about here. TCU's not the Big 12 champs. And this is going to be absolutely the equivalent of a college football playoff game for Kansas State, especially with Bryce and Will playing. That team seems like they're wired in a way in which they liked hearing that those guys are going to play. That just makes it all the potentially sweeter and of greater magnitude for them. So even with the news that Alabama is going to have its marquee players, I don't look at it as a gimme, because if it's kind of a not a big deal to the guys once they get down there, then you're going to have a problem with this Kansas State team. And there's also depth to be taken into account. I don't think it's as big a deal with all the transfer portal guys for one game, because most of those guys were depth providers. I guess Javian Cohen, a starter. But you've got Tyler Booker that's played a ton at offensive guard to go along with Emil Ekiyor. But I think you got to look at Kansas State with a very legitimate eye and say, that's a good team, and not the kind of team that maybe you'd like to see in this type of situation.
They're going to come at Alabama with their best shot. There's no doubt about it. This is a huge opportunity for Kansas State. Alabama better be ready with its best game. And you're right, whether or not Alabama is super motivated to play in this one remains to be seen, although certainly the fact that Anderson and Young are going to be playing in this one lends credence to the notion that they'll be able to pull this team along. At least you'd hope so. From a motivation standpoint.
You can draw back to Citrus Bowls like Alabama, Michigan State 12 years ago, right? At the end of the 2010 season, you can look at the Citrus Bowl to cap the 2019 season and say, well, those were teams that, you could tell were springboarding into another season. But at the same time, you can look back to 2013, didn't really show up against Oklahoma down in New Orleans. 2009, didn't really show up against Utah. I'm with you. I think if with Will and Bryce, not as importantly as what they bring talent-wise to the mix, but I would think the mindset will be what it needs to be. I'm gonna go with that anyway.
Aaron Anderson transferring to LSU. That's the last some of the latest news out of the portal. That was a highly regarded wide receiver. Never really got on the field as a freshman. Had some injury issues. I believe he made his season debut against Austin Peay. Certainly not what Aaron Anderson would have been hoping for a freshman debut at Alabama, and off he goes to an SEC West rival. So that's between him and Holden and Earl, that wide receiver rotation, along with Cohen, as you mentioned, obviously being a starter on that O-line. But apart from that, the receiver rotation in the Sugar Bowl is going to spread some wealth too with those absences.
You would think. It felt like by the end of the season, they pretty much had a defined rotation at wide receiver. Kendrick Law was starting to factor in more.
Right.
This thing with Aaron Anderson, it just feels like a guy who's going home.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of the same way with JoJo Earl going to TCU and being from Texas. So, you get that one-time chance without penalty of a sit out or a year that you have to sit out. You got the one-time rule now. So, some of these guys, I think after a year or so, they're feeling like I think what it shows us is maybe there were some guys that were pretty torn even during the recruiting process. And this is a way to go about changing that.
And speaking of the recruiting process, Travis, as we close things out, got to mention National Signing Day upcoming Wednesday, December 21st. Alabama currently with the number one class in the nation, a couple 5 stars, lots of 4 stars. It looks like, barring any surprises, it's going to be another huge haul for Nick Saban. Keon Keeley, the big-time pass rusher of late, cast his lot with the Crimson Tide. I know that was a big pickup, Travis. It's clear for sure that Nick Saban has not lost a fastball on the recruiting front.
No, they're still getting it done. There's going to be some turnover on that staff, you have to think too, but they're holding it together to get to Wednesday and the start of that early period. And it looks like defensively is where the finishing kick is probably going to take place more than anything. And you're right, with Keeley, the one-time Notre Dame commitment now in the fold. They've got some early enrollees that are already going through bowl practice. Justice Haynes, the outstanding running back from the state of Georgia, is expected to join the Alabama team here in the next 2 or 3 days. So if there's any concern about the recruiting effort on the heels of what some would refer to as a disappointing season anyway, it's not showing up from that perspective.
All right, that is going to do it for this edition of the Talkin Tide podcast. For Travis Reier of BamaOnline.com, I'm Chase Goodbread, sports columnist with the Tuscaloosa News. Stay tuned. We'll be coming at you again with a look ahead at the Sugar Bowl and much more on our next podcast here on Talkin Tide. Until then, we'll talk to y'all later.